had a terrible time remembering her lines. And unfortunately, we didn't know at the time that she was suffering from the early onslaught of dementia. But they would find ways, if you watch the show, like you showed a scene where she's getting married to Jack Guilford, and she's in the bathroom. But the reason they put her in the bathroom was so they could set up a little lectern and put a light so she could just read her lines from the script, because she just couldn't remember anything at that point, And I remember late nights, reshooting after the audience left to get it right. But it edited together beautifully, and she won an Emmy.
Part of the beauty of the Sophia character is that she is spacey sometimes. And so in the latter seasons, when the director, one of the main director of the show wouldn't allow Estelle to use cue cards, but after he left, subsequent directors would. And so when you see Estelle reading like that, it works for Sophia because she just looks like she's staring into space a little, and she's had a stroke. But there are moments earlier in the series where you can catch her. Whenever she's eating nuts out of her hand, it's because her lines are on her hand. And she would write on props all over the set. She wrote on all the tablecloths. She wrote on the salt shakers. There's a famous story in the book that one of the non-writing producers, who was a young woman at the time and really idolized the four actresses and didn't want to have to reprimand them at all. But there was a moment when it was an episode called A Day in the Life of Sophia Petrillo, where she's going all over town. If you remember, she's volunteering at the AIDS ward, and she's doing all kinds of wonderful deeds, and it's bookended by the beginning and the end of the episode. She's picking out fruit in the supermarket. And so it was a very Estelle-heavy episode, and that Estelle dreaded those because she's, as one producer told me, she's the only actress in the history of television who asked for fewer lines rather than more. And she was panicked about remembering them. So this was such an Estelle-heavy episode, she was really panicked about it. And they're taping a scene where she's in the grocery store in the fruit section, and they notice she's reading the oranges. That she's just and they realize she's written her lines on the oranges. So they sent this young female producer, who was only in her 20s, down to tell Estelle, you can't read the fruit. And so they started to rearrange the fruit so that the camera would definitely not see the words and whatever. And Estelle was panicking. No, don't move my fruit, don't move my fruit. So, it was the beginning of a physical problem. But what happens with panic is it feeds on itself. The more you tell yourself I can't remember the lines, the more you're not going to remember the lines. The more you panic about not remembering the lines. So, she did have a physical problem combined with, I think, actual just stage fright.
Right, exactly.
Now, I want to get to your question. I'm sorry, we held you off.
Two questions. First,
double prong.
My friend who wishes to remain anonymous, Rick Evans, said that there was a disagreement or a conflict between Rose and Dorothy, that they really didn't like each other. Is there any truth to that?
I know my answer. I want to hear Rick's first, if I'm going to put you on the spot.
Well, when I was there, I was just this, excited 24-year-old. I didn't notice a lot, but I never saw it when I was there. I never saw evidence of it. I know Jamie Wooten told me more specific stories after I left of what happened between the two of them. But yeah, it is common knowledge to everybody, that they did not get along. And you must know what it was over, right?
I think I know what it's over. Nothing that specific.
Buy the book.
Yeah. No, nothing that specific that I can tell you. Like, there's a moment where they disagreed over something material, but yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty well known that it was more one-sided that B didn't like Betty. I don't know if Betty would admit to not liking B. Betty's not the kind of person who would admit to not liking many people, even if she didn't. And in fact, one of the things I was juggling when I was writing the book was how much can I get into that, because I don't want to spread either rumors or 30-year-old stories that have been exaggerated. I don't have any way of gauging them and weighing them properly. But then Betty did me a favor by when she went on Larry King's show, I think it was, and she was asked that question, did you get along with B? And she said something like, she finally admitted, she said, well, B didn't like me very much at times, it's true, which is the first time Betty has ever owned up to anything like that. In fact, in 2003, before writing this book, I was writing a story for TV Guide where I interviewed Betty, and my editor made me ask the question about B because they wanted some gossip for the story, for another story that wasn't even related to mine. I thought, Betty's gonna hate me, what am I gonna do? So when you do those kinds of interviews, you save controversial questions for the end, so that if they hang up on you, it doesn't really matter. So I saved it for the end, and I hemmed and hawed and apologized to Betty. I said, I have to ask you this. Did you not get along? And she just laughed and said, "Ooh, someone's been reading the tabloids." So that was really her only answer until more recently with Larry King. But what I have heard, and what I also think is the root of it, is just they were so diametrically different in that B was physically imposing, big, scary looking, but on the inside, very vulnerable, very easily hurt, a mushball, very delicate. And Betty is the complete opposite in that she has that sweet grandmotherly exterior, which I'm not saying it's not real. She is really a sweet, wonderful person. But underneath that, she has balls of steel. That's why she's 98 and still in the public eye, because the woman knows what she's doing. And so I think that B, who prided herself in not taking bullshit and not believing people's bullshit, saw Betty's sweetness as bullshit. So I think she thought that was one thing. The other thing is, it seems their acting styles were completely different. B came from the theater, Betty came from what B would derisively remind her say game shows. Although when Betty would do a great job, like a scene that would bring you to tears, which she did often, B would give her credit for that and say, "Wow, okay, I was wrong, she's amazing." So that would happen. But I think in the beginning, B was a snob about where Betty came from. Betty came from the Mary Tyler Moore kind of character comedy. B came from the Norman Lear school of extreme close-ups and real issues and very theatrical comedy. Betty could get a script and be off book the next day because she can memorize anything, and that drove B crazy because she wanted to be on book until the last minute. Betty, during taping breaks between scenes, would break character and goof around with the audience and welcome people and make them feel at home. B couldn't do that. She couldn't get out of Dorothy mind and then slip back in, and so she resented Betty clowning around with the audience. So it just, everything about them was set up to be completely different.
Question two.
Oh.
Question two, I'm sorry. Season 1, the gay housekeeper, any take on what happened to him? Why was he written out?
Well, he just passed
Come on
away.
in. Come on in.
You know.
Come on through, guys.
Yeah.
Come on
I
through.
mean, do you have an answer?
What I heard when I got there was that, the pilot was tested so highly, it was so successful, but all 4 women were so strong, they just didn't need a 5th person. That's the official story, but we've got the author here.
That is basically the truth. I mean, I was skeptical because in 1985, and a lot of people would tell me this, the writers, it would just come up, the writers I was talking to about the Golden Girls, they would say Hollywood was in such an AIDS panic that you'd go into any show, I'm not talking about the Golden Girls, other shows they had been recently working on, they'd talk about going into the writer's room and somebody would come in and say, "Oh, that restaurant on Sunset Boulevard, one of the waiters has AIDS, don't go there anymore." And people would spread that kind of stuff, that kind of panic. And so that would kind of trickle into what the network thought about putting gay men on television at all. Because they thought if the whole country's in this panic about gay men and about this disease, maybe we shouldn't put gay men on, not only not to scare the audience, but out of respect to gay men in a weird way. They just wanted to avoid the issue. So I was skeptical, having heard all that a network would just cut. That a network would just cut a gay character for non-homophobic reasons. I was reassured by everybody that this is what happened. That the show, Estelle was not meant to be a regular character. It's true. Sophia was meant to be recurring when it was first written, and she did so well and got such big laughs that they were like, okay, well, first of all, she has to stay. But that the show with the, as they call it, the laugh spread, the amount of laughter that goes on that you'd hate to have to cut, was for what's supposed to be a 22 or 23 minute pilot back in those days was like 29 minutes. And they realized, okay, not only do we have to cut a ton of stuff, but how are we going to service 5 characters every week adequately and give them good jokes and have this problem every week when the character who's clearly not needed is Coco. So that all did make sense.
Also, to bolster that theory is that Susan Harris was very powerful in television, and she had created Soap, and she had introduced the first gay character on network television. So I can't imagine Susan Harris saying, "Oh, okay, we'll take him out if the network doesn't want him."
And actually, this other story I should have said first. The other story I heard, and that's so true, is that the network actually requested the gay character. That when Brandon Tartikoff, who was the president of NBC and actually came up with the germ of the idea for the Golden Girls and gave it to Susan Harris to go off with and write, everybody claims that it was part of his original idea that there would be a gay houseboy. So, yeah, I don't think that Susan, even whether she had the idea herself to create the houseboy or not, would acquiesce and say, "Oh, sure, you don't want gay guys, I get it." By the way, Coco was named for her dog.